Hello everyone and welcome to today's Mike Ames Recruitment Show, where we're going to be talking about how to get more vacancies from TAs. We know it's a hot topic and we have the inside track with our guest today, Victoria, who Mike will introduce in a minute. But before then, Mike, can we just sort of talk about why we're talking about this today?
Well, yeah, things go around in circles very often, I find. And in the 90s, there were a thing called resource managers or resource controllers, which was sort of the old-fashioned version of TAs, really. Some of them did direct recruitment through websites in the late 90s. Some of them just managed the agencies, but that became very popular. Excuse me, then it died back a little bit. Well, it's come back with a vengeance now in terms of talent acquisition, where essentially, let's be honest, what they're doing is taking away work from recruiters. Let's put it out there. They're actually doing the recruitment that recruiters would normally have done. And in many cases, they make it hard for a recruiter to work in the way that they want because they protect line managers. You can't speak to them. It makes it very difficult. But there has to be a way. There has to be a way that you can work with TAs to get vacancies from them. And really, that's why I wanted to have this show today, because it's. I don't think there's going to be less TAs. I think there's going to be more. So the sooner that we figure out how to work with them, as far as I'm concerned, the better. Hence, asking our guest to come on the show today, Victoria Kirkhope. Hello, Victoria. Kirsty's just a bit dopey. Look, there she is. Right. Hello, Victoria.
Hi there.
I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a second, but just suffice to say, you were the head of people for RSM in the UK. I know they're an international firm. And one of the things that you did when you were there was establish their TA team. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so could you just give us a little potted history of yourself and where you are now, just to give people a perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in generalist HR, and as you say, I worked for 20 years with RSM. So background very heavily focused on professional services. Was with RSM and predecessor firm Baker Tilly for 20 years, and I really grew my career within the firm, from HR advisor to board member, and latterly their head of people. I left RSM and had a little stint as a freelance HR consultant, and I have now been sucked back into the corporate world, and I am currently working with a small but growing accountancy group in Scotland, private equity backed, and I am their head of people and culture.
Thank you very much. That was great. Over to you, Kirsty.
Yeah, so just before we get in the first question, I would like to ask everybody who's watching, have you noticed that there is an uptake in TAs when you're coming up, especially in those larger corporates? Are you coming up against more TAs? Let us know in the comments. Okay, so first question, Victoria, is can you tell us what it was that you did at RSM, kind of what you did around the TAs?
Yeah, absolutely, Kirsty. So I was with the business for a long time. So I sort of saw that TA offering evolve. We went from having generalist HR team managing recruitment and vacancies, so essentially working with recruitment agencies, outsourcing everything, to then, as the business grew, we would have an in-house recruitment contact whose role was to better manage perhaps relationships with agencies centrally on a national basis, and also the big part of that was managing the tech, so managing the systems and having somebody responsible for essentially coordinating recruitment through the system. That then evolved. We RSM merged, Baker Tilly merged with RSM Tenon. RSM Tenon had a much more established in-house recruitment presence, and as part of that that merger, we decided to invest in the in-house recruitment team essentially. So that was from the perspective of bringing in entry-level talent, which had always been pretty much done directly. I think volume recruitment, especially entry-level in professional services, tends to be more direct recruitment historically as well.
Are you talking through the website, that kind of thing, where people put their details in? And
Absolutely, Mike. Yeah. And for entry level, so I'm talking about milk rounds, so graduates, school leavers, trainees. That sort of recruitment was always historically direct. Where we then looked to invest and to grow in the TA team, was where the business strategy was growth. And the business wanted to grow. And so we looked to invest in the TA team because actually there were a number of reasons for that, but predominantly to help to support the business, the employee experience, the business culture. And so what that involved was actually bringing people in-house to help with our recruitment. And that has evolved to be not just a filling vacancies, but it is more of a working alongside the business, thinking about the business strategy, thinking more long-term, working with internal clients on more than just filling vacancies. It's about where are our skills gaps, where are our immediate gaps, where are our future gaps, how much of a talent pipeline do we have internally, and where do we need to supplement that, where do we need to buy?
So just follow this. This is quite an important point, actually, Victoria, because I think there is a perception, and this may well be true in many of the companies out there that use TAs, but they're effectively just in-house recruiters. But what you're saying is, I think, that actually that's a subset of the work that they do. They're much more integrated into the business and are very much a part of it. So they understand what's happening now, but what's going to happen, and perhaps help to steer the business too. It's not just one directional, it's from them to the business. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I think it depends very much at what stage of evolution an employer is at with their recruitment team and their TA team. So there will still be some that are called TAs that are still just doing more of that transactional filling vacancies and trying to do that. Some will have a big focus on that. I think where the bigger companies and those that are growing are looking to position the TA role is very much more as strategic workforce planning to help with that, to work with that.
That's interesting that you say that, because a little later we're going to explore how you can start conversations with TAs that don't really stem from "gives a job" or "got a vacancy." What can we talk about that they're interested in, that they would find valuable to get a conversation going? And of course, there could be some really interesting areas in what you've just said there to be able to kind of engage and add value to people through content. So we'll pick on that a little later, actually.
I will also say, before we kind of move on, if anybody has any questions for Victoria, you've got a window into the mind of someone who knows TAs very well. So if you do have any questions, put them in the chat and I will bring them up. But Mike, back to you.
Okay, so so you set up this TA department. What was the main motivator behind it? Because I think if you really want to understand how to work with someone or approach them, you have to understand what the motivations were, because that makes a big difference, really. So what was RSM's motivation? Was it saving money or what was it?
So not predominantly saving money. Obviously, cost is a consideration, but actually it is an investment, upfront initially to bring in and to invest in an in-house team. So there is a cost aspect to it, and certainly the TA teams will be required to show that they are adding value and saving a little bit of money. But actually, the predominant driver for me was very much around in our employer brand, making sure the messages were being represented properly in the marketplace. It was around making sure that we were getting the right candidates in for us, and actually we felt that we could best sell the business in certain areas, in terms of communicating what the culture's like, and what it was really like to work.
Can you dig into this a little bit as well? Because I think that there's another worry out there. Maybe some people who are tuning in will have this, is that the rise of TAs is nowhere near finished. That it marches onwards, and so there could be companies now that they have as clients that they're doing great business with, but in a week's time they get a phone call to say, "Oh well, look, we've got a TA now." And you have to report to them, and you say, "Oh no, oh my God!" Right? So, I'm wondering about this motivation. I know obviously RSM very big company, and a lot of the companies that we deal with perhaps deal with smaller clients. But had someone come to you and said, "Well, could we work with you to put a really good EVP together that we can represent to the client to make sure that we were bringing people in on brand?" Let's call it that. Do you think that might have, well, perhaps not stopped you from doing it, but would that have been an interesting conversation to have? Because that's what they can do right now. They can actually talk and say, we could be like a TA in a sense. Could you expand upon that for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I think that is an interesting conversation. I think it's an essential conversation in terms of working with TAs, but I don't think it will stop the progress of them internally. And the reason for that is because, as we said, the role is, it's not pure, there are other elements, other internal elements to it, that if you are really using the TA role properly inside an employer, there are other elements to it that join up with the wider talent strategy that actually can't be accomplished from an outsourced partner.
Okay, can you tell us what it's like to be a TA then? What's their typical day like? What motivates them? How are they measured? Anything you can give us an insight into how they're thinking would be useful, I think.
So it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig. It's a lot around internal stakeholder management. There's a lot about, and certainly when we were developing the talent acquisition function, there's a lot about trying to make sure that you are in the right conversation. So it's not so different, probably from some of the challenges that outsourced recruiters have. So there's a lot about making sure that they are building those relationships internally, so that they are seen as trusted partners internally to be able to help to drive the business forward. It's about understanding the business strategy. It's about thinking about some of the challenges, alongside then obviously managing the day-to-day, which will be immediate recruitment needs, and deciding whether or not is this something that we can source and resource internally, or actually is this something where we do need to look for some specialist help. And that would be when we would look to outsource to a recruitment partner.
Yeah, I want to dig into that in a little while. But the reason I'm interested in this is if you want to get close to someone, they always say you've got to join the conversation they're already having in their heads. In other words, you've got to say things that show that you understand what it's like to be them, what their world is like. And this is, if you're watching this now and thinking, well, this isn't telling me how to get business from them. Yes, it is. Because if you can have a conversation with someone and they totally understand that you get what it's like to be them, the pressures that they're under, the kind of motivators that they have, that's going to move you one step closer to being a trusted advisor, to getting inside the circle with them. So can I ask, do they often get pressure from the business as well? If they're not delivering somebody, say, that the business has asked for, will the business push back on that a little bit and say, where's the person? You're late. It's not just all sweetness and light necessarily.
And there's an awful lot of managing expectations. There's an awful lot of managing expectations, and it is the role of the TA to make sure that they are communicating what the market is like, what some of the challenges might be, managing those expectations. With the best will in the world, there is often an expectation of we needed this person. I told you last week, why have I not got interviews in my diary for this week? So that there's a lot about trying to manage that. There's a bit as well around if it's a particularly specialist skill set, or if there's a particular shortage of candidates in the market. The TA's role is then to try to challenge around, okay, what if we can't find you the right person or this skill set? How are we then going to manage that internally, so that sort of working with the internal stakeholders on making sure that the business has the skills, even if it's not perhaps the ideal first choice of just acquiring them and putting someone in that position.
Well, we had, in the 90s, we ran one of the UK's first MSPs, managed service provider, 94 or 95, I think we set it up. And one of the things I noticed during that time was that some of the managers that we were dealing with in the clients, where we were like the in-house TA team in a sense, outsourced to us, that they would be quite harsh sometimes. It's like, if I don't get this person, it's on the critical path, it's going to affect the project, you're holding us up. And they were quite adamant that we would have to sort this out. In other words, the TAs aren't sitting there with their feet on the desk drinking coffee, are they? They're under a lot of pressure, a lot of them, to deliver something that the business wants.
They are, absolutely. And that's why I think the good TAs are talking to their internal clients about future needs at an early stage. So they're trying to be more proactive about requirements, skills requirements, who they need going forward, and less reactive. I think a lot of that pressure comes from reactive environments, as well, where it's very much I need it now, I need it yesterday, actually I needed it last week, and why are you not delivering it for me now, as opposed to actually taking the time to stop, think, and to plan. And that for me is a key differential of a good TA.
Somebody else's bad planning is not my problem, as they always say, but it kind of is if you're a TA, isn't it? It sort of is your problem. You know, it shouldn't be that way, but it is. Can I also ask a question just around this while you mention the internal stakeholders, the business? Many TAs prevent agencies talking to the line managers, and I understand why they do that. We always let them, but there was a set of rules what you could or couldn't do. The reason that we let people talk to line managers, or the agencies that we worked with, we let them talk to the line managers, was we felt they could probably get a better steer on the inside of the vacancy rather than just what was written on a job description or, you know, requirements specification. What's your take on that? Do you feel that agencies should talk to line managers or not?
A couple of thoughts on that, Mike. So my overriding sort of view on it is, why not, if the manager is the right person to speak to? So I think that would be right. However, I think, again, employers set up TA functions to take some of that pressure away from the managers, you know, to make sure that they are able to do other things. And if that is the structure internally and you have a good TA, that good TA should be able to give you the insight, to understand the role, to understand the business, and to work with you and give you almost more than you would get from a hiring manager. Because actually that TA should better understand what they are asking you to do than perhaps a hiring manager would do. So in theory, I don't think it's helpful to prevent or to put barriers in, but I think we do need to stop and think about actually what is the setup internally within that employer. And again, it'll be different within different employers. You know, the TA team are there to take some of that pressure from hiring managers. The other point I would just make on it is, and I think, you know, when we were looking at just sort of content for the show, there was a question in there about how do you get to speak to someone in authority? And I think that's a really interesting point, is what do you define as somebody in authority? Because somebody in a senior position in a business who might from the outside look like, well, that's an important person, I want to go and speak to them. They might have the job title, they might have absolutely no responsibility for recruitment budget or recruitment planning. So actually it is about trying to understand the dynamics inside each employer and who is the right person to speak to and where can you get the information from.
We are going to dig a lot deeper into that in a minute, I think, because that's a crucial part of this challenge, to work with TAs to get vacancies, to help where you can and deliver the service that they want. And you obviously make some money, which is the point of doing it. But where are we next, Kirsty?
We've had some really good questions, and I think probably is now a time to delve in. Keep them coming, guys. So you mentioned, Victoria, that you might consider using a specialist recruiter. So they've said, out of interest, which area would you consider specialist? You know, is it tough or is it a really complicated role? What would make you go outside of a TA provider?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think wherever there isn't a volume of candidates in the marketplace. So, you know, if I think particularly to some, I can talk about professional services most comfortably because that's, you know, that's where I've been. If I think about some of the more highly technical or specialist areas, like, for example, VAT, you know, like some of the more specialist taxes. So where there isn't perhaps a more readily available candidates, I think that almost holds true as well the more senior you go. So the more senior positions are, the less of a candidate pool there tends to be. And so, you know, again, I would say there is a big role for external recruiters in terms of helping with more senior vacancies as well as more specialised vacancies.
And with them, just to follow up, would the TAs have a crack at it first and then like give them a week? And if they say we can't find anyone, would you then go external, or would you look at a role and think we're going to need to just go out? What would you do?
Personally, I would think that would be a strategy up front that's decided. So actually you would know whether or not it was likely that you were going to be able to find a decent candidate. You then take a view as to whether or not it's a good use of your TA's time, you know, to spend doing that. And also, from my perspective, you don't want your name out in the marketplace in the wrong way. So you need to think about how you go to market. What is the candidate experience? You know, if people are being approached directly and then approached, you know, with an external recruiter, it doesn't always send the right message to potential candidates. So for me, for highly specialist roles or skills sets where you think actually this is going to be difficult, my preference would usually be to work with a trusted external partner to
Fascinating. Thank you. Okay. So the next question I think is a really good one, and it's one I think get a lot of people. So generally speaking, do you find agencies deliver better if you work with multiple vendors per vacancy with the idea of them trying to outcompete each other? Or do you prefer to assign a single agency to a particular vacancy? This is basically contingent versus kind of exclusive or retained, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you get more from external recruiters if you work with them on an individual basis. That's not always possible, but I think sometimes with the more specialist vacancies it is if you have the right relationships set up. But where employers have preferred supplier lists, that would tend to be those on that preferred supplier list would all get the vacancy. I think where it is more specialist, yeah, I would agree. I think agencies would tend to deliver better if the work is on an exclusive basis.
We had a thing called an intelligent dynamic supply list. That's a bit of a name, isn't it, really? So we ran agencies, but we said to them, well, what's the best thing that you do? Just tell us what that is, because we'll just give you those vacancies. We won't give you anything else, because you'll be measured. We measured everybody on performance. And if you didn't deliver, then we just took you off the list and replaced with someone else. So I think there is a thing about agencies, I can do anything, give it to me, I'll do it. Actually, you're not doing yourself any favors there, are you, really? If someone comes to you and says, look, right, I'm really good at this. I've got this big network. I've built up a talent pool of people I'm talking to who aren't necessarily ready to go yet, but they'll come on stream at some point. If you get any vacancies in this space that you can't deliver, I'm your man, or I'm your woman, of course. Would you feel that's more attractive than someone saying, I can do anything, just give it to me and I'll nail it? Yeah,
I do actually. I do, Mike, absolutely. And I think that is where the real value is that that can be added, is by saying this is my specialism, this is where I can help you. Again, it comes down to understanding where are the more harder to fill areas, where are the more harder to fill vacancies, the specialisms, where can you really add value? So stop and think about, how can I add value to this person?
Well, I really want to dig down into that. I really want to dig down into that. I think we've got to go to sponsors first, but I really want to dig down into that, because this is the practical stuff. How can we get ourselves in when these TAs are being phoned up and emailed left, right and centre? And I'm sure you've got some stories there to share with us. How can we stand out? How can we get the ear of a TA so that we begin to position ourselves for getting work from them? So we'll do that in just a short moment.
But first, Mike, you are correct. It is time for a message from our sponsor.
Well, here's the thing. Once we were owed £250,000 by one client, and everything was going swimmingly well. And then I got a little nod to say, I think they're in trouble and I should stop putting people in there. This is contract business. So I did, and it came down to the wire. Had they gone bankrupt, we would have gone as well, because that debt was uninsured. And increasingly in these troubled times, to have your debt insured is an important part of business security, to build a safe business. Now, we are proud to be sponsored by Giant Finance, who obviously provide insurance on contract debt, but they also provide insurance on perm debt. So if you want to liberate money into your cash flow, moving it from an invoice that's been submitted to in your bank, Giant can do that for you, and they do insure that debt. And okay, it's not as bad if a company can't pay your bill and it's a permanent invoice. That's not brilliant. It's not as bad as if it was contract where you paid money out already. But I think getting that insurance in place and liberating that cash is important. So if you're interested to learn more, you will find the contact details of your Giant representative attached to this message. So give them a call, see what they've got to say.
Excellent. Okay, Mike, I believe it is probably now time to move on to those more practical steps that we so much enjoy.
Okay, so we've kind of talked around this subject. Let's get it out on the table. Specifically, when would a TA go outside of, to the agencies? When would they reach out? What would trigger that?
Well, it would be if there was a vacancy that they felt that there wasn't candidates that they could easily access, or a lot of candidates available for a specific vacancy. So if it's a specialist vacancy, if it's a particularly senior vacancy, or if there's just a lack of skills in that area. It might also be, however, if they themselves have a heavy workload. So actually, if if they are balancing, yeah, absolutely, if they're balancing multiple projects, internal things as well, and in their role, they might then look to outsource some of that excess workload that they have.
Okay, so I know you didn't work in the TA department. That was something that we don't. You didn't you weren't TAing for people. But what approach would have been attractive for you? What would have sort of got your ear if an agency had rung up? Because you must have got, or your team must have got a lot of approaches from agencies, I would think. What would have got your attention and begun a dialogue with you, a conversation with you?
Can I flip that on its head a little bit, Mike, and kind of first of all share what was a big no for me?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, that's as good. Yeah.
Somebody did ask that question, Victoria. Somebody has asked, what would you do the magic wand away?
More common than you might think, but I call it the spray and pray approach. So continually just specking CVs, candidates in, continuing to just send emails, blanket emails to everybody and anybody within the business. Sometimes the same emails, sometimes different, sometimes to different people. That was a big turn off in terms of we don't really want to work with anyone whose approach is that sort of spray and pray. So send loads of CVs and hope something sticks or something comes out of it, or lots of emails. The other big one for me is name dropping. So sort of saying to the TA team or to somebody when they're responsible for recruitment, I've been speaking to, I was out with, I've invited X to this, because that to me shows that you're working around an internal structure, not with it.
Yeah.
And there is an internal structure, whether you like it or not, whether it's easy to work with or not, there is an internal structure there for a reason. That structure has been put in place by the business for reasons. And if you have someone a recruiter who is working around that, well, first of all, it says to the TA, actually, I think they are more important than you, and I'm going to work around you to get to that person. And exactly, Kirsty, it sort of disrespects the internal structures that TA is working within. So
I was asked a question on this recently, one of our forums that we run internally in our program, and they specifically said, I think I could get a CV in front of a line manager, and I think the line manager would back me, and because they want this person. And I said, well, it's up to you. If you do it, you'd probably wait one transaction if you're lucky, but the TA team you would be on a blacklist. You would never get in there in a million years. That's right to say that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. Or I think you need to think about what your approach is. Is it short-term, immediate, one or two placements, or is it a longer-term partnership and relationship that you're after? Because if it's short-term, fill a vacancy, get this candidate, and I can do it this once, that approach might work for you. But actually, if you're looking to build a longer partnership, to work with the business longer term, it's not the right way to do it.
One other question for you then around this is that effectively there's two types of BD for recruitment companies. There's tactical, which is about getting a vacancy, right? Mm-hmm. And typically it would be, we've got this great candidate, would you like to see them? Or gives a job. And sometimes it's been triggered by an advert, say that maybe your business was running, that they could clearly see it wasn't from an agency, it was actually in this case from RSM, and they knew that vacancy was there, and they would ring in trying to get the CV. So that's tactical. The other approach is strategic, where you're basically saying, look, I'm not really interested in vacancies per se right now. What I want to know is whether our flavour of recruitment, and that could be a niche or specialisation, is to your tastes. And if it is, we'll wait. We'll wait until an opportunity comes up. We just want you to know what we do and prove that what we said is true, and then we'll wait. Which do we need to do both of those, or what do we need to do? Which is the best way to move forward with this?
I think there's an element of both. However, my focus would be on the strategic. And I think that's because if you can actually find some common ground with a TA and actually show where you have something that makes you interesting, that can help them, that will absolutely dividends in the longer term. However, you do have to look out for vacancies that come out, and if there's a particular vacancy that you think, actually, I think I can show my credentials here, I think I can prove how good I am with this vacancy, then I would absolutely be reaching out to say, I think how have you had success? If you haven't had success, I think I can help.
That is a major touch point right there, I think, is that when you see an advert and you obviously see, you know, the company that it's for, and you get in contact with whoever it is, the TA or whatever. I think the first question has to be, you know, or a statement is, I know you've done that because you want to fill it yourself, because it's true. I mean, that we know that, right? So when would be an instance that you would consider going outside? At what point would that be? And then arranging to kind of recontact around that, rather than steaming in there and saying, we've got just the candidate for you. If they've just released it 2 days ago, clearly the TAs want to hang on to it for a bit because it's their job to fill it. Would you say that was a sensible approach, is to say, stay cool and do it on their timetable?
Absolutely, Mike. And even say, you know, if you want to discuss how the market is, or if I can help with any insights, and you know, what brings something, you know, to help potentially, and that then gives you a nice touch point as well in terms of checking in again in a week or two's time to say, actually, you know, would it be helpful I can share my experience in recruiting for similar roles in the marketplace, you know, and just share some of that insight, and that all helps your TA or your in-house recruitment person when they are getting pressure from the business about why is this vacancy not filled. You know, they can then say, well, actually, I know that this is difficult, or I know that it usually takes X long to try to get these candidates, you know, from sharing.
So giving them the information that they can then manage the internal conversations that they're having and expectation. That's interesting.
Absolutely. And that then you're front of mind, you know, as well, in terms of having helped previously.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
an
what we're
interesting
getting here is this is about relationships, isn't it, really? I know it's a bit cliched to say that. It's about relationship building, but it is, really. It's about being less transactional, although I accept what you say. If you've got someone and you can see the vacancy's been up there for some time, then yeah, why not? But actually, a cleverer game is to put timing to one side and say, well, look, you know, you may or may not have anything, but I'm not really that interested at the moment. What I'm interested in is explaining what we do and where we do it and providing proof. I mean, if someone had approached the TA group that you had, would you be looking for some kind of proof, you know, like, I don't know, testimonials, case studies, some kind of proof? Because anyone can say anything, can't they, really? Talk is cheap.
Absolutely. And there is an element of due diligence, of course, you know, to be done, especially when you're looking at being preferred suppliers in bigger organizations. But I think it's about, as you say, just building that trusted partnership and building that relationship. So it is more around what can you bring other than just filling vacancies.
Well, I want to dig into that in a second. I want to go deeper into that, because we
do you have some questions, Mike?
Okay, let me just cover this bit off first, and then I'm totally down with the questions. Right, well, I want to dig into that content approach, because we're very big on content here, and I think it is a great way to change the narrative. But one simple question, if I can. There's a statement these days that the greys are taking over, and they don't mean grey hair like I've got. It's the fact that people don't seem to have much of a personality about them, or they don't seem to be able to communicate in an interesting and lively way. I accept you don't want to be phoned up by Jim Carrey or something, or some comedian or something, but how important is it to be yourself and to be three-dimensional when you talk to TAs, as opposed to gives a job, or, you know, we do this, we specialize in this? What do you say about that?
I think for the long-term relationship, and if you're in it for that strategic approach, I think it's very important to be able to be yourself. And I think, actually, as with everything in life, that might not be a fit, you know, and actually that you need to know that, you know, you need to know that, you need to understand the business that you're working or trying to work with, and understand whether or not there is the right fit there in terms of your style of recruitment, and what the employer is looking for and how they work going forward. I think establishing that up front is absolutely key. So you do need to be a little bit selective. Selectivity on both sides. It is a two-way process, as every partnership and relationship is.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So we've got a couple of questions, Victoria, that I wanted to bring up. Now, this one is interesting from what you said earlier about if you kind of go to the hiring managers, it could go really badly for you. Because this person's asked, Lindsay's asked, in your experience, would the senior leadership team or C-suite appreciate an intro of a top candidate from an agency, or would they rather ignore the perfect candidate and wait for the TA team to find someone appropriate? So we've already mentioned that if you take this approach, you might get one person in, but possibly no more. But would the senior leadership, would those hiring managers actually just say, I don't work with you, mate, go TA?
I think there'd be a mix of approach there. I think if there was an interesting CV come in, they would, I mean, my experience, that would then get put to the TA team to process, to reach out, to go through the structures that are there. Then we come back then to when that TA then gets that CV, they're thinking, well, why did you not send it to me? Why have you sent it? Why have you gone above my head? Why? And if the system works properly within an employer, that CV will be sent directly into the.
If they did this, I've got a question on this. If they did this, but said, and the TAs come back and say, well, why didn't you come through us? If they said, well, genuinely, I didn't know you existed, I just know that they're in charge of this, that, and the other, that would be okay. That wouldn't be offensive.
I think that's fair enough as an introduction, absolutely. And I think if that's that's the introduction, then I think that's fair enough. But in my experience of being in a leadership team within businesses is that you are always interested in top talent. You're always interested in talent that can add something and bring something to the business. The key, though, is, if I go back to my please don't spray and pray approach, it's about making sure you understand what the business's priorities are, what some of the conversations they are having internally about talent, so that you can then know, actually, this is a top candidate that might be of interest to this business. And I think the only way you can do that is by having conversations. And if you've got good TA teams, they should be able to have those conversations with you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So the next question we've got is from Ashley, who's asked, how many vacancies at any one time do you feel a TA can work on effectively? And in reality, how many are they often working on? Some people have TAs working on up to 70 vacancies, which is just ridiculous from the sounds of things.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think, again, to put a round number on it, is kind of very general. Being very generalist and generalising. I think it depends on what the vacancies are, the level that they are. If you've got perhaps more junior vacancies that require less experience, less specialism, it's easier to work on more of those. Arguably administrative vacancies are easier to source directly, perhaps, than some of the more qualified and professional vacancies. So you could be filling numerous vacancies by doing the same things. 70 is ridiculous. I think, again, depending on the makeup of it, to be honest, if you're looking at 20 plus, I think that's really when you're starting to think, right. Okay,
I think you make a good point, though. It is the type of vacancy. If you're working on vacancies which are very specialist or hard to find, substantially less. If a steady stream of CVs coming in and you're just turning them around, you can do more, really. But it is. I get where that question's coming from, Ashley, and I think there is a recognition of when is it time to go out? When is it time? I said, if you're struggling,
if you remember, sorry, Mike, I was just going to say, if you remember, one of the key things that was a driver for investing in TAs internally was around that candidate experience. So actually, I think there's got to be an acknowledgement by the TA team when candidate experience is going to be impacted by retaining those vacancies, and that has got to be an overall consideration, because the last thing the employer wants is for slow recruitment processes to miss out on candidates or to have a bad reputation in the marketplace as well. So that lack of ability to respond quickly.
Yeah, so I do have another comment. So Anthony, who is also a TA specialist, so he's agreeing with everything you're saying, Victoria, which is a consensus here. So he says the number of similar sales pitches I hear every week is amazing. Everyone works strategically and uses a headhunting approach. He's using bunny ears quotes here. The agencies I tend to engage with are the ones that stand out and don't just use the same pitch as everybody else, which leads me to sort of the next question, which is from Terry, which leads into the next thing we want to talk about. We get the response that the hiring managers have preferred agencies that they've used before, that they want to use. If we're not approaching hiring managers initially, how do you get on the radar of TAs without an introduction from a manager in the business? And I think, Mike, this is a great place to bring in content.
Yeah, this is something I'm very keen on, because I think you've got two ways, really. We've got the one that we've already discussed, which is a simple approach to say, and you can't tell people you're different You have to show people you're different with the approach. The approach itself has to be different, has to be more strategic and less linked to, here's a job, mate, you know, I need some money now. But the other thing is around content, isn't it? So you were talking about earlier, Victoria, I think it may have been off air actually, that you can get the interest of TAs because they've got things going on in their world. What kind of content would they be interested in? What sort of things, research or white papers or guides or something would they be interested in engaging with?
Yeah, so I think if you can tap into what is the key priorities on their people agenda generally, the TAs will all be part of that wider people strategy for the business and part of that wider people agenda. So tapping into things like, how is AI going to impact the future of work? What are skills for the future potentially? Changes in terms of roles going forward in certain professions. Those types of things, TAs will be thinking about, how is this going to affect the environment generally, and how is it going to affect me? So if you can sort of have a broader conversation, around these things, again, it's thinking more strategic.
I've seen some very interesting work recently about retention strategies as well, really, which is quite original stuff, to be fair. And I really liked reading. I bet that for some of them, because you're not going to get something that's of interest to everybody, are you? You're going to have to choose your content. But things of that nature, which a recognition, as you said, that they're more than just internal recruiters. Yeah, they actually have a role to play in the acquisition and retention and development of the people that the business needs. So a rich area, I would think, for content. What kind of things would your TAs have been interested in then when you were at RSM?
So most employers have a huge focus on employee experience, so that ties into the retention aspect that you mentioned, Mike. So, any sort of research, any sort of initiatives, anything new going on, not only in the immediate market that the industry that you're working in, but wider, bringing ideas in from external, anything that they can take to feedback in that might actually help in that sort of aim of growing, attracting top talent and retaining them.
I've got a question on this as well, because we often say with content, the best kind of content that you can produce is to figure out the frustrations that a group of people are having, so clients, TAs in this case, and then find somebody who has the same job title, so another TA who has cured that problem, and then interview them, because people prefer to peer learn than they do to go to a guru or a specialist. It's like, well, this person's had that problem and they solved it and I interviewed them. Would that be a reasonable way to get one of many ways? Would that be a reasonable way to approach people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that is difficult to do sometimes is to network with peers, and to find opportunities and forums where you can discuss with peers who are facing similar challenges. So even creating opportunities to connect,
like a TA round table or something, a TA online round table.
Absolutely, or some sort of a seminar, online or in person. It was something that just gives the opportunity for people to connect, to step away from the day-to-day and think differently, and create a bit of space to think.
Well, in these days, it's so easy to arrange, isn't it? To arrange a Teams call or a Zoom call or something of that nature with a speaker and perhaps an agenda and, a discussion process. So that's really, really useful information, actually.
All right, we are coming to the end, but we've got some really great questions. So, Victoria, are you okay if we overrun by like 2 or 3 minutes? Because I've got some really good questions that we want to get asked. So Jessica's just asked this. Do you feel TAs prefer to work with multiple niche agencies that each have their own specialism? Or would you prefer to work with an agency that's kind of a one-stop partner, so one agency that has multiple verticals? Which would you prefer?
So I think for me, this comes back to a point that we made earlier, which is it is all about relationships and actually what you buy from an individual. So you buy from the person. For me, it's not a case of whether it's multiple agencies, it's about the individual and what that individual can deliver. So for me,
it goes back to being a 3D person when they approach, being a 3D person, have something about you, but also have a clear idea that this is what I specialise in. Here's proof that I'm good at what I say I'm good at.
Yeah, and it might be one organisation has multiple people on different verticals, and you get on well with the person who does that one, but you think, oh, that person's actually as interesting as a piece of cardboard, not interested in that.
That's really important. That's a really important point. Go as a person, not as a representative as a company in a way.
Okay, amazing. Rob's asked this one. How do you mitigate the industry problem where TAs end up competing on vacancies with their PSL?
So I think that's where you have to be really, really specific about what you are putting out to recruiters and what you are managing directly internally. And I think it's a really good point. And that again is where I would encourage clear agreements at the outset, really clear agreements. So, you know, if a vacancy has been managed directly to a point, you know, is it then completely over to recruiter, or is the employer going to continue to try to recruit directly, and making sure that you're really clear on those boundaries and clear on those definitions. Similarly, if a vacancy is going out to a recruiter, being really clear about the boundaries and what will happen with any CVs or applicants that are received directly during that time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Gary's asked this question. This is a real-time example. We know of a business with a small team of TAs and will use external support on an agreed PSL if required, but the specific roles still appear live after a period of time. What happens when these roles still remain unfulfilled? Do you have an example where this happened, and how did you manage it? You know, if new agents had approached, but you couldn't gain access to the PSL.
Okay, I'm going to have to just take a minute
if you've got a PSL being given the roles who haven't filled it after an extended period of time, would you then go out to newer agencies outside of the PSL?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's where, for me, it's really important to be clear in terms of, you know, upfront what will happen after a certain period of time if roles aren't filled, and to agree that upfront so everyone understands where you're working. But yeah, I have worked outside of PSL previously.
Another question coming in, but I just want to ask one as well, because there's a rise as well in this concept of virtual TAs, or TA as a service, where you say to smaller businesses, not to the likes of RSM, I'll be your TA as and when required. So I'll fill it myself, or I'll go to agencies. And for medium-sized businesses, there seems to be an attraction for there. Have you got any comments or advice for people who want to follow that route?
I think, again, I can see where that would come in, particularly where there is enough recruitment to justify it,
but not quite enough to employ a permanent TA.
Yeah, indeed. So in that sort of interim phase, again, I think, Mike, it's about understanding the business, really understanding what the drivers are, doing your homework in terms of, you know, what the business is looking for, and working in that. It will be interesting to see how that develops.
Well, one of the things that people are using it as a protection of losing a client to a TA is to say, well, you're not big enough to do the whole thing, but you're too big not to have some kind of structure. We'll do it for you, and it seems to be quite attractive, I think. So, see how that, as you say, see how that unfolds.
Okay. It's not massive from exclusivity, really, is it? I guess.
No.
Okay, all right, perfect. So we've just got a couple more that I just want to pull in there. So Mark said he works in financial services. The TA process works best in his mind when they act as a conduit. It falls down when they try to get technically involved. He 100% gets the TA role, but wouldn't expect a TA to have detailed knowledge of certain complex areas. So in technical/complex areas, should TAs first filter the CVs?
Okay, so I disagree a little bit with that. For me, TAs should absolutely understand the technicalities of the roles that they are recruiting for, and should understand, you know, some of the skills and technical experience that is required. I absolutely appreciate that you know, doesn't happen all the time, but for me, a good TA will really understand that and will have spent time to get to know the business, get to know the team, get to know the individual role. They will not know it, obviously, and have had the direct experience as much as the hiring manager will have had, and that is where, you know, there does need to be that working together on roles and working with the business on roles. But for me, a good TA should understand the technical aspects of the role that they are recruiting for, and be able to talk to and add value in terms of communicating that role to recruiters and talking about the skills.
I think it lends from what you said kind of right at the beginning, where there's been this shift from where TAs are just essentially putting bombs on seats, and then moving into this strategic partnership where they do understand the organization a lot better. They understand needs and wants and their expectations around it. So perhaps previously it was more difficult to find TAs with that kind of knowledge, but moving forward, perhaps it will become harder more of them.
It is an investment for the business because you have to invest in your TA team to allow them to get that experience and that knowledge. It's just a different approach.
Okay, all right. So just last question that I've got. I promise, Victoria, you've been very kind sharing on. So should a TA communicate their candidate status on a role with external partners?
So I'm just trying to wonder what's been asked here, Kirsty. So candidates.
I think maybe if they've got somebody like internal, or they've come up with somebody, should they say to their external partners, "We've got this role filled; it's not going out to you"? Or I assume is that what it means?
I mean, absolutely. I would always recommend a period of advertising internally before you go externally with most roles. Anyway, I think it's good practice to do that. It saves wasting time too of external parties if there is the potential for roles to be filled internally. But absolutely, and I would always say that there should be ongoing communication with external recruiters and the contact internally at every stage, so that between you have the best chance of filling that vacancy.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. So in a second, Victoria, I'm going to come to you. If people do want to get more vacancies from TAs, what's the thing they need to keep in mind? And in a second, I'm going to come to you for that. But before then, Mike, let's talk about next week's show, where we're talking about how you can beat the competition with a simple strategy, aren't we?
Our next show, the whole team is here. Peter's with us as well. And we're going to just look at something which is a very simple strategy, zero cost associated with it. But when done properly, will give you an edge, I promise. That's not just hyperbole or shizzle. Honestly, it's something that you can do, which is going to steal a lead in lots of different ways. So look out for that, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Perfect. Okay. So, Victoria, we spoke at the beginning. This top tip is something that people can do, which is sort of tangible results. And when we asked, this was what you offered as your top tip: treat a TA as a partner, not an enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you take the approach of thinking of your TA and your role as different, so you bring different things to the party and establish what you can both offer, work in true partnership, understand the business, understand the structure, understand what your TA is trying to do. For me, that would be the approach, rather than thinking, I want to fill this role. Work in partnership with your TA.
More strategic, less
as well, I think.
Sorry,
Mike, I think it's a respect thing. That's what you said. Out of everything else, they respect your role and don't try and get around it or kind of avoid you or manage you or something. It's, I respect this is your role and I will be in it with you, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And each brings a different thing to the party. So it's about finding out what you can bring to the party that will add value and is different.
Okay. All right. So we're pretty much at the end. There's just one final question, which somebody said, is this recorded? Because they need to watch over. We have covered a lot and we've run over a little bit, which I never normally do, but we had a lot of questions. So yes, you can. It is available both on our channel on LinkedIn and also our YouTube channel. I'll put links to both in the comments below. But Mike, we have come to the end of the show. So would you like to do our thank yous and take us home?
I certainly would. Well, obviously, thank you to you, Kirsty, for being the most hostess with the mostess, as always, keeping us on time, there or thereabouts. But as you said, a lot of interaction, an awful lot of questions, and I think they needed to be answered. So please forgive us for running over. But obviously, also like to thank Victoria for coming on the show. Got a new job, got a new focus, but still found time to come on and just be massively open. I knew this would happen. I knew you'd do this when we talked about it before. Just opened up and told us lots of practical advice and strategic advice. It's been brilliant. So thank you so much, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time.